I'm James Demer, the audio nomad, and today my special guest is Alex Saltz of APS Mastering. He has been mastering audio for, at least 25 years, maybe longer, and he has some world-class clients. He's going to tell us about what mastering is, what makes mastering different from mixing engineering, and then we're going to get into how mastering affects how we listen to music through headphones. So let's get into it.
Terrific. Hi, James.
Hey, Alex. It's so nice to finally connect. I know we've been trying to do this, I think, since Can Jam New York City, maybe. It's been a while.
That's right. That would have been back in February, right?
February, that's right.
Yes.
So you're in Astoria, Queens, which for those that don't know is it's a neighborhood in the borough of Queens, which is part of New York City.
That's right. You cross over the bridge, generally from Manhattan, the 59th Street Bridge, and it's its own little enclave. And Queens has a lot of ethnicity, probably a little more diversity that way, and it's a lot quieter. So I ended up moving out here from Manhattan a long time ago because I found an apartment here that was on a quiet block, and it's just really conducive for having quiet and doing audio work and having a separate studio space.
Yeah, I love that. I love Astoria is cool. It feels very sort of family-oriented, neighborhoody, but it still has a little bit of gritty texture to it. There's an arepas, I think it's like a Venezuelan sandwich shop, a arepas shop in Astoria that I like to go to when I visit. Yeah. Maybe you've been there.
I might have, but not recently, but it sounds good.
Yeah. So tell me about your studio. How did you get into mastering anyway? Because mastering it's a sort of a niche specific area of audio engineering.
Yeah. So I started out as sort of this kid who was really into audio. I put together these Frankenstein stereo systems and car stereo systems, and I ordered parts from catalogs, and I took things apart. I had no skills as an electrical engineer, but I did my best to fix things. And then when I was around 13 or 12 or 13, I started playing the drums, and got really into that. And also simultaneously, my interest in audio evolved a little bit. So at around age 19, I took my first job doing some like sound engineering for film. I did theater sound using those old, open reel tape arrays. At the time, that's where we were using 2 tape machines, and you had to bounce back and forth. And then just playing in bands.
And that's because you just didn't have enough, the reel wasn't long enough to hold an entire show or whatever you were.
Right, and also the cues, you had one cue that the stage manager was telling you to play, you had to cue up to the next one on the next machine so it was ready to go.
Oh, wow.
So back and forth. So
was that stressful?
It was so stressful, but it was a lot of fun, and it really made me learn how to concentrate and take cues. But then playing in bands, playing in drums, I remember I worked on a CD with a band, and we had our first mastering session, and this would have been way back in like 95. And as soon as I went to that session, like a light went off in my head, and I thought, this is what I would love to do myself. So that was kind of the beginning of my interest in trying to get into mastering. Even though I had some experience doing recording sessions, multi-track, and mixing, mastering just seemed like a good fit for me.
And can you just tell us in a nutshell, what is mastering?
Yeah, it's an album is tracked in a multi-track session. All the tracks are put together in the mix down into generally a stereo mix. These days, people also mix for other formats, but I focus on stereo mastering. And so after each song is mixed from the multi-track session down to the stereo mix, you have the mix that then goes to the mastering engineer. And what I try to do is I try to make it sound as good as it can and as technically viable for the medium that it's going to be delivered into. These days, that's largely digital streaming. There's still people who cut CDs, so I prepare CD masters, and sometimes, or actually quite often, vinyl masters. So it's a combination of making each song sound as good as it can, getting the right frequency balance, the right dynamics, the right levels, going in and fixing little issues, perhaps like sibilance or other extraneous noises. Things that poke out, you might want to smooth them out a little bit. Sometimes if something is too dull, you want to try to bring energy out into that. So that's generally how you approach each song. And then on projects where it's an EP or perhaps an album with multiple songs that might have been mixed at different times, you want to make it into a cohesive statement from track to track, so that not only will each song be as optimized as much as possible, but the collection of songs and tracks as a whole will relate to each other sonically.
You know, that's interesting. I actually never thought of that an album might be recorded certainly at different times, but possibly at different studios. And so you're getting material from different time periods, different locations, different microphones, different rooms, and you have to make it all sound cohesive and unified. I would imagine that's probably pretty difficult at times.
Yeah, it's sometimes you wrestle more with a mix than other times. And there are instances when I have a client that's chill hop music. That's one of my clients, and they're in the Netherlands and they do a lot of compilations. This is more of a chill hop genre. But if it's a compilation with 28 different artists on it with original tracks that they've recorded, that could get challenging, trying to find a sonic thread between everything so that playback sounds fluid from track to track. Sometimes a producer might be more oriented towards a huge bass shelf, for instance. Other producers might be looking for more mid-range clarity or sparkle and sheen. So you have to kind of find this artistic thread between everything and deliver an end product that people want to sit down and listen to and go for the whole thing.
So that's interesting. Also, you're saying that you're in charge of creating what you think is your best work, but you have people, maybe it's the musician or maybe it's the recording engineer, telling you what they want it to sound like. How do those relationships work?
That's a great question.
Are they like in the studio with you, or is it like a ping pong back and forth?
They used to be in the studio. When I first did mastering for the first probably 5 or 10 years, maybe even 15 years, I had a lot of attended sessions, and it was more collaborative. You would get input from the clients sitting there, or the clients, sometimes a lot of people, and you would sculpt each track sonically so that it was meeting their expectations. Now, the landscape has changed because now people are all over and they hire mastering engineers from different parts of the world. So you work largely remotely. People send digital files to me. They give me as much guidance as they want to, or they completely leave it up to me to do what I feel would serve the track in the best way. But generally, I try to get into the mindset of what the artist wants, and I listen to the mix. And if someone delivers a mix where there is a lot of bass, and they have some experience as a producer, you can assume that that's the direction they might want to go in. And A lot of times it takes some email exchanges. Some people want to have more input and they want to explain the direction that they want me to take the music into. Mm-hmm. So it could be one person might have a lot of nuances to what they want, and they try to communicate that to me. Other clients just say, do your thing. And I
speaking of clients, you have quite a who's who list of clients. Do you care to tell us some of the notable clients that you have and maybe some of the interesting projects that you've worked on over the years?
Yeah, sure. I have the sort of the good fortune of working in multiple genres. That's what mastering engineers tend to do. There are a lot of people who end up getting into more niche genres. But I find myself extended into all different types of genres. So if we were looking at, say, indie singer-songwriter music, for instance, I would say I worked on the first Vampire Weekend EP, which was the one that it was more of a release that they circulated locally. But they all came into the studio and that had some of their hits on it. And that was a lot of fun. Later on, there's a band called Deer Tick. They're from Providence, Rhode Island.
Yeah, I know Deer Tick, being in New England and Maine. And, they come up to Portland, Maine from time to time. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I did their first two albums,
Wow.
War Elephant and Born on Flag Day. Then there are artists like the Shivers, who have a long history in New York and other places. I've worked with Keith. He's the lead songwriter of that band. I worked with him for a long time. We've done lots of albums. Recently, there's a guy named Evan Honer, and he is currently I think based in Nashville. He's a young artist and he's doing really well. And I'm always excited to work with him. I used to do work for Little Steven Van Zandt. He had a record label called Wicked Cool Records. And a lot of those albums were also multiple artists on one release. For instance, there was a release called The Coolest Songs in the World. And we did 8 volumes with like 16 tracks in each volume. And there were great bands on those albums.
For those people who don't know, Steven Van Zandt was Bruce Springsteen's guitar player for years.
And I think he still tours with him when Bruce goes out. And he's known as Little Steven or Steven Van Zandt or Stevie Van Zandt. And he's a great guy and incredibly knowledgeable about music and the history of rock and roll and all that. So there were a lot of great people on those compilations who I got to master tracks for REM, Tom Petty, the New York Dolls, the Go-Go's.
Wow.
The list just goes on, and I had a lot of fun with those.
What's the worst track that you received in terms of like poorly mixed? I don't know if can you say what would a bad track be? Like if someone handed you something and you're like, oh God, this is going to be so much work. Like what does that look like?
That's a good question, because sometimes the artist is going for a lo-fi kind of beat up vibe. And when that's the case, you don't want to try to veer too off of that artistic intent. If it's an artist who is trying to go for a more polished pop commercial sound and they send me a track that needs a lot of work, it can be difficult. Sometimes I will get back to them and I'll suggest them remixing elements to maybe bring things out or suppress other things in the mix. I like to work that way. I want the artist to be happy with the end result. And if I feel I can't just get there with mastering alone, I might ask them to remix elements. But there are a lot of tracks that come in where there's a lot of imbalances. For instance, the vocal might be too strident and bright, but the drums and guitar might be too dull and blunted. So in those instances, it's sometimes difficult to find EQ curves where you could, say, tone down one part of the spectrum and enhance another.
For a layperson like myself, explain how the process works, and then maybe what hardware and software you use to come to the end result that you want.
Generally, mastering engineers have a digital workstation like other engineers, and within your DAW, your digital audio workstation, you import the tracks, and you have a track.
And that would be like Pro Tools or...
I use software called the Magic Amplitude Pro. I'm using Pro X8 suite, and it's good. It serves my needs really well. So you bring the track in. Now, depending on what you want to do, you could master the track within that DAW landscape using plugins, third-party plugins, processing like, say, DMG Audio Equilibrium. That's a plugin that I might use.
Right.
Or there are a lot of plugins from Plugin Alliance that I use. And you have EQ dynamics, and you just try to find the sweet spot by balancing all these different processors to make them sound like a unified statement. And there are other times when I will send the track out into my outboard analog processing gear to give it a little more character or some kind of flavor that I'm looking for that I feel I might not as easily be able to attain using just plugins.
And what would one of those tools or a few of those tools be? Like compressors, limiters?
Yeah, I don't know if you could see this, but this is an EQ. This is a common mastering EQ made by Mazalek, which is a British company. So these all have distinct characters to them. When you use a lot of analog processing together, it almost becomes your color palette. A painter might mix colors together to get an end result, and it just becomes an intuitive, very kind of experimental task where you're just using different tools together in conjunction with each other, or just maybe one or two tools to get the end result that you have in your head.
I know that, so I have 25 years experience as a location audio mixer, and my tools are very different from your tools, but it's still microphones, recording source, and RF and that sort of thing. And it took me years to get to the point where I just didn't even think about, mic placement over someone's head. Like it just became intuitive. And I would know that how to place a certain mic because I know what its off-axis response is and so on and so forth. And can you tell me a little bit about, how your workflow has changed over the years and how you've arrived at something that, feels right to you?
When I first started mastering, I was also doing some work in other larger mastering facilities, interning, learning from other people. And my setup was very basic when I first started. So how that changed was initially it was a very simple setup. I mean, I go way back to when I think I was using Sound Designer 2 as an editor and Digidesign CD burning software. And I think the first processors I got were a Waves plugin bundle, and the prices at that time were astounding. I think I paid like $1,600 for a suite of 4 Waves plugins, which now would cost like, $100.
Wow, that's crazy.
So using that was those were my tools at the very beginning.
Yeah.
But very quickly, I started to build on my digital processing, adding more plugins, using different digital audio workstations. I've used Pro Tools. I've used, I remember using at one point something called Bias Peak, which was native to Macs. And over the years, other DAWs. Then I arrived at Samplitude, which is Windows-based, which is a limitation because Windows has its issues. But that's what I've been using for quite some time now, probably close to 15 years.
Wow.
And as far as other stuff that's evolved in the studio, monitoring has evolved. And that and my analog chain has evolved. You keep on adding gear to that. As you know, as engineers, we sometimes get fixated on gear, and we could get kind of compulsive about it, trying something and liking it, or maybe not liking something else and getting rid of it, doing modifications to gear, which I've done a lot of. But I would say setup wise, the setup overall has just expanded over the years. So my tools, the processing tools that I draw on, have gone from a very streamlined count to something very expansive. And likewise with the analog processing. Now, because of workflow considerations, you can't spend all day, experimenting if you want to run a business. And that's the good part of doing it for many years. As you said, things become more intuitive, and your workflow just becomes more direct. You know what you want to do. You don't need to do as much experimentation. This will work and that will work. Now, sometimes I don't know, and I still have to experiment, because each project you work on could have its own tricky aspects to it. And there still always will be, in my mind, I'm always learning, and I'm always trying to keep an open mind, and I'm always listening to my clients, because you can't figure it out. You can't figure everything out. It's art. Music is something that everyone has their own way of doing it and what they want to hear. So you have to be very malleable to each client that you work with and the tools that you're working with.
So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you monitor the audio that you're mastering, whether it's speakers or headphones or both, how you mix for unintended. You said you're a stereo guy, mostly 2-channel. So are you thinking about your audience using headphones or speakers or both? Like, how does that all come into your equation when you're putting something together?
Yeah, right now I'm focusing on stereo mastering. I'm speaking with someone about getting more into Atmos mastering, but I'm busy with stereo mastering and I enjoy it, and I don't see it going away. I see going into immersive audio as possibly something I might venture into, but for now it's easier to do stereo mastering because it involves 2 main speakers or just regular headphones. I wouldn't use these to master with, but it is good to in my mindset, I like to use hybrid monitoring setups. Now, there are a lot of engineers who feel that they work best with just one set of speakers or one set of headphones, and they stick to that. I find that it's helpful for me to have a larger, pool of headphones and speakers to go between. Now, my main speakers, these are speakers I've been using for some time. They're called Lipinski L707. And I've used many other speakers over the years. And I kind of landed on these because I do like to hear a lot of detail when I'm mastering. And I found that a lot of speakers, I wasn't getting that microscopic detail that I wanted. I wouldn't hear little issues in the upper mids and other frequency areas as well as I could with these. And I did a lot of amplifier pairing with these to get them to sound as, as clear as they could without being fatiguing, because they could be a little ruthless. But those I've been using as mains. And then as secondary speakers, I've just gone through many, many other pairs. Currently, sometimes I use Gen LX. I've also used speakers by way back in the day by Event Audio. And then many others. But with headphones, that's also part of my mastering process. Sometimes I go between the two, and I feel that you can learn how to master on headphones. It's not something you can do overnight. It takes probably years before you really figure out how it's going to translate. And
Tell me more about why is that? What about the process of mastering on headphones is so difficult?
I wouldn't say difficult, as it's just a different picture into the music. With speakers, your room, the acoustics of the room play into what you're hearing. You're getting reflections, you're getting certain modes in the room that will influence what you're hearing. So you go to great lengths to use acoustic treatment to absorb certain frequencies and balance the room to make it as flat as you can. But even with that, every room has its own distinct frequency balance. Whereas with headphones, you pretty much know what you're going to get. You don't have the room influencing. It's just direct from the headphones to your ears. Now, of course, you could get into everyone's ears are shaped differently in our canals, and we do hear differently with headphones. But there's, I would say, a consistency in headphone monitoring. Even when you're bending down to turn something on, or if you're moving around, you're no longer concerned as much about the sweet spot of what you're listening to. And I do use some pretty good headphones over the years. I've had partnerships with companies like Odyssey, and a lot of partnerships with in-ear monitoring companies, which years ago were not good enough to use for mastering, but now it's a completely different game. So there are a lot of, as you know, there are a lot of fantastic in-ear monitors. But I also do, I work on a blog called Pro Audio Times, where I review a lot of headphones and in-ear monitors. So, I have a good number of them in the studio, dozens of headphones and in-ear monitors. And, I try not to, I'm busy, so I can't focus too much time on it, but companies send me this stuff to listen to. And I'd say I have a few that I really use for utility in mastering.
What are those?
This is the Odyssey MX4. It's not their newest model. They have the LCD5. And then I also have Odyssey LCD-X. I have LCD-XC, which are like the X's but closed back. And each one has its own sound. It gives me insight into something unique.
So when you're mastering something and you're using headphones, will you use different headphones to listen to the same track to see how it changes with different headphones? Or do you just know the characteristics of that headphone so you understand how the track sounds intuitively?
A great question. Generally, I might go between two headphones, say like the MX4s, and then I'll check it on the LCD-X. But there are times when a track might be difficult to find the right balance on, or there might be some frequencies up higher that I feel I really need to zero in on. And for those, for instance, I just pulled a few out, but I have these Aurorus Audio Borealis headphones, which it's a smaller company, but I find that they have a lot of detail up top.
I had the Auroros Australis, which was their closed back, which
it's nice.
Yeah, which was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I also use some electrostatic Stax headphones. Have you ever used those?
My father-in-law gave me a pair of Stax years, I don't know, probably 25 years ago, maybe more, that were his old Stax from, they might have been from the 70s. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They were cool. Yeah, they sounded good.
Yeah, Stax, again, more bright leaning, but at the same time, you're able to hear certain things in the top end and treble that maybe you wouldn't easily hear in other headphones. Mm-hmm. And then there are the old standards like the Sennheiser HT600. I have an original pair of those. Do you have those?
I don't currently own the HT600, but I've owned them in the past. It's a great set of headphones.
Yeah. What are you wearing classics now? What are those?
Oh, this is a Simgot.
Yeah.
I think they're the EP5, Simgot EP5. You know, it's, I wouldn't do critical listening with this. It's a dynamic driver. I want to say they're like $80, maybe less.
Yes.
They sound really good. The thing that I like about them is they fit incredibly well. I have a fairly small head, so like I need the cup to be kind of up higher, and these just sit really well. And I get super annoyed with headphones that slide around on my head because the sound, as you know, changes. You know, you could sound completely different if it's forward or back or up or down or whatever. This is a small enough over the ear that it doesn't slide around in my head. The clamp force is just right. So they're kind of a Goldilocks, inexpensive set for me.
Well, you bring up a good point, which is that headphone comfort and ergonomics are a factor when you're an engineer. If you're doing a session where you're using headphones for a good chunk of it, it has to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out, everyone's head shape is different. So it plays into the selection of headphones. Yeah. Comfort and the ergonomics. Odysseys, for instance, like the LCDX, are pretty heavy. And after 3 or 4 hours, you feel it around the back of your neck.
Yeah.
That's one of the good things about in-ears, that they're very light. And some of them, as you know, are more comfortable than others, especially with respect to the nozzle thickness and the shape of the actual...
shell. So, let me ask you this, because Alex, with so many different sort of frequency responses available, and like that's sort of the thing now, right? With in-ear monitors, headphones, especially in-ear monitors. I mean, I'd say with everything, but you purchase almost based on frequency response. People are looking at graphs before they buy. When you're using an IEM or a headphone to mix, like how important is it to you that you have something that's a flat frequency response, or is that a myth? Like, is that not something that you need when you're doing your job?
I would say for mastering over the years, the general preference is for flat, or trying to achieve as flat as possible sound reproduction in your monitoring and headphones. However, as we know, there are certain curves like the Harman curve, which are preference curves, and those are for a reason, because we don't necessarily perceive a linear flat curve in headphones as being flat, because we have natural sensitivities in certain frequency ranges. So they've done a lot of research into finding more optimal frequency curves in, say, in-ear monitors and headphones that might not necessarily graph as flat. It gets tricky because in a room with speakers, you generally want to go for as flat a response as possible. That's how it is with mastering, at least. And with headphones and in-ear monitors, engineers like mastering or mixing engineers probably lean more towards neutrality and slightly flat than someone who's just listening for musical enjoyment. For instance, a lot of in-ear monitors have big bass shells now, and these tuning preferences evolve over time. They're constantly updating preference curves for in-ear monitors. But again, it comes down to kind of different avenues of playback, consumer playback or audiophile playback. Engineers looking for more linear tunings. So I would say in general close to flat, but with headphones it's a little bit different. You're also looking for preference curves.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy how from the Harman curve being the thing with in-ear monitors to now there's the new meta, and then there's the IEF 2021 and the 2025, and these companies that are manufacturing seem to jump on the bandwagon of different tuning preferences. And it's kind of fun, I think, as a community that, you can sort of shop for a tuning preference that you like.
And the fact that our own tuning preferences might change over time.
So true. So true.
Especially with just general music lovers, people who listen to consumer audio equipment, audiophiles. It's kind of something that is always evolving. Your taste is always changing. That's why audiophiles are always swapping out gear and getting new speakers and new headphones. It's a lot of fun, and it's ultimately you are reaching higher tiers of fidelity, and products generally do get better over the years. Although there's still a lot of products that have been around for a long time that still sound fantastic with both headphones and speakers.
And I think that's what's so cool about your job and your career, your lifelong career as a mastering engineer, is that you've sort of found tools that work for you, but you're picking up new tools all the time that you can kind of throw in your bag of tricks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Especially the digital tools right now with plugins. You have a lot of control over certain elements, and even now there are AI tools which allow you to do things that were not possible 5 years ago.
Oh, give me one quick example.
Okay, there's a software company called Isotope, and they make mastering software called Ozone. I believe I have Ozone 11, but 12, if I'm getting the numbers right, is now out. But I believe with Ozone 11, it might have been Ozone 10, there are AI rebalance tools where they could actually separate the bass guitar or the drums or the vocals using an AI algorithm, so that you could actually, just with the stereo mix down, without having the multi-tracks, just the stereo mix, you could actually bring up or down those elements.
That's wild. That is pretty cool.
Yeah. And recently I heard, or I think I saw an ad on one of the social media sites. It was software that can separate a drum set recording that was recorded with one mic, the drummer's playing, and it could completely isolate just the hi-hat, just the bass drum, and just the snare. And it doesn't sound like it's being gated. It just sounds like you're hearing that instrument alone while the drummer is playing all of, the drums, like the bass drum, the hi-hat, and the snare. Even on hits where they're all together, it will just isolate each instrument.
It's incredible. I mean, I'm not even sure why we have people anymore.
I know. Now we're getting into AI produced music where you give it instructions and it could spit out a hit song.
Yeah, I watched a Rick Beato YouTube video about AI and his thoughts on it, and it's wild stuff. Well, Alex, thank you so much. We'll put a link to your website in the show notes, and if you have any album albums or anything like that that you want us to also link to that you've mastered, we can do that as well.
Okay, that sounds great. It was really nice speaking with you. And my only wish is I wish we could have gotten into more of what you do, and I could have, flipped the questions onto you.
Well, if you come to Can Jam New York City next year, maybe we'll go have a cup of coffee in the morning and we could trade some more stories, I'm sure.
Let's do that. Okay.
All right. Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again. Great chatting. This video is brought to you by Linsoul.com. Linsoul sells IEMs, headphones, amplifiers, digital to analog converters, cables, really just about anything you could want for personal hi-fi or even home hi-fi. Their prices are great, the quality is exceptional, and their customer service is really second to none. Check them out in the link below.